Hi there, it's Pamela. Well, we're on the last legs of our project today. It seems to have taken quite a long time, but we're getting there. Today we're going to do the sleeves. So I've taken the pattern off. We've got all our markings transferred to the sleeve. So I'm going to clip those apart, because remember it was single thread we used right through. So if we peel that back, we've got our markings on both sleeves. Now a sleeve tends to be, the curve round the top of a sleeve tends to be slightly larger than the curve of the armhole, and what we've got to do is ease that in, and that allows us to move. If it was too tight, you would find it really restrictive. So what we've got to do is ease this larger fabric into the smaller space. And to do that, we're going to, with these markings we've got the three markings. This one will match up with the shoulder seam, and the other two are the markers where we have to do the easing. So we're going to ease this curve into the top curve of the sleeve. To form this ease stitching, we're going to stitch 2 rows of stitching between these 2 outer notches. The first row will be 1 centimetre from the side, remembering our seam allowance is 1.5 centimetres. Our second row of stitching will be just close to this line, but we don't want it to get tangled up with it, so we'll do it slightly away. So no reverse stitch at this stage, because we want to be able to draw them in. And because your stitch length is slightly larger, it'll feel like the machine is running away fast from you compared to the smaller stitch, and that's just because it's having to draw the fabric through faster. So take your time with this, don't press too hard on your pedal. So no reverse stitch here. So I've done these in blue stitch so that you can see it. We've gone right the way round the arc of the shoulder with the 2 rows of stitching. They're in blue so that you can see it clearly. I've just left the cream on the other side. So we do that to both sleeves, and then we're ready to close up this part. So I'll do that first. Right, so that's the markings made. So it was easier to do that while the sleeve was still open. So what we're going to do now is close the sleeve and do the hem. So this just matches up at the side for under the arm, and we'll stitch the 1.5 centimetre seam allowance here. Remember to turn your stitch back down to the smaller stitch, and I've changed back to my matching thread. And at this stage we're just as well to do our hem, because it's easier without having the whole garment attached to it. So I'm just going to open that seam allowance and do a little double fold, just 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 centimetre, and I do a double and then pin it right the way round. I can do this by eye because I've done it so many times. If you felt like measuring it, you could do. Right, so I've got it pinned right the way round now, and because this is quite small, see, it doesn't fit over the table very well. You can usually remove your toolbox. Most machines have something like that you can do, and that allows you to get in and have the sleeve sitting over the bed of the machine like that. I'm going to start at the underarm, putting the edge of my hem against the edge of the foot, and that will give me an even stitch from the right side. It's not so much this edge we want it to be an even amount away from the folded edge. So we'll do that next. Make sure these threads are out the way. There we are, and as soon as we're in place we can take the first pin out. Now, because this is a narrow seam allowance, if I lower my needle now, it's kind of missing the hemline, so I'm going to, on my machine I can move my needle position over so that it adjusts, so now it's sitting over the fold. So that's what I'm going to do here. Right, so we're all hemmed, it's all prettily finished now, and we're ready to set the sleeve into the garment. These gathering stitches, we can take the end and just pull on it slightly and it's ready to gather up. So we'll start it off just a little bit, a wee bit pull from either side, and then we can take it to the garment. So don't pull it all from one side, or you might just pull the threads right the way out. Actually, I'll just leave that one aside and we'll work on one at a time. So we want the sleeve the right way out, and we want the garment inside out. And then we have to check which sleeve we're using, and we know that by the little snips that we've got. So there's one snip, and there's two, so I know this is the front, and where the two are, that's the back. And if you match the underarm seam, you know that it's got to go to this side. So the underarm seam is the first mark we're going to make, first join. So I'm going to pin on the inside because I'm going to stitch on the inside, so we'll make that the first pin. Like that, and our little snips are an accurate mark to go with also, and then just check again that you've got your one snip with your one snip. We can pin that, and the two with the two, so they go together nicely as well. The next mark we're sure about is where we had this fabric mark. Remember, we did the thread marks. We've got the three. This middle one is the mark that goes with the shoulder seam. That's usually the case. It may be that you've got a yoke or something at the top, so the markings would be slightly different, but for this one it goes with the shoulder seam. There we are. So that's us in the right area, and now we're pinning. We can put another couple of pins down here that under the arm it matches together really easily, so there's not too much problem with this part. We don't need so many pins, but I'm going to use a lot of pins to make these fit. It's pretty smooth till we get up to the notch, so I'll add another few pins here. That's us up to that mark, and we'll do the same at this side, keeping the fabric, the cut edges even. There we are, and now we're going to make this fit, this flat part fit to these gathers, and it's a case of pulling at the threads and moving them around till you get an even distribution of the fullness. Now, because this is a convex curve, the line of stitching is a shorter line than this cut edge, so this might be a bit frilly. But at this line down here where we're going to stitch, the fabric should be lying flat, and that's what we're aiming for. So we're distributing the fullness until we get it lying smoothly. We don't want any pleats and tuckers. This isn't a gathered sleeve, it's just ease that we're doing. So we'll put a few pins in and we'll keep adjusting it until we get it to lie smooth. And it really is, the more pins the better at this stage. So that's it all pinned now. As you can see, there are a lot of pins round the armhole edge, but as we get towards the shoulder, there's a lot more. And each pin I've put in, I've just distributed the fullness between, so that I don't have any puckers where I'm going to stitch. And because they're so close together, we'll really only get a couple of stitches before we're stopping and withdrawing another pin and then stitching on. So we'll do that next. So we're going to stitch from the inside. We want to stitch with the arm, with the sleeve showing at the top, and that's because this is where the fullness is, and we can keep an eye on keeping it smooth that way. The back will just be smooth. And we're concentrating on making this part smooth. So that's what we're going to do next. So that's both the sleeves stitched on. That was relatively straightforward. If you do find you have got a little pucker anywhere, you could unpick that little bit of stitches, and then just, if you unpick that part and then smooth them out again, then you can just overlap your stitching a little bit, so you're doing that little bit again. There's no need to undo the whole thing usually. As long as you do your little reverse stitch where you're doing your overlap, you should be able to sort the little area out rather than doing the whole thing again, because it's quite daunting to do the whole thing. Having done that, we're ready to take those little thread markers out. We've used our notch marks and all the rest, we don't need them again. And we can pull out those gathering stitch threads relatively easily. Yes, if you pull one out, the other one will just be lying at the back, and you can pull that out also. And there's another mark. So we'll just get a wee bit tidying done here. Right, just to help finish off our garment, I've done a little double fold with the iron, barely a centimetre and then about an inch. There I go, mixing up my measuring methods, but nearly half an inch and then an inch, just to give us a nice hemline. Now I'm going to top stitch this, and when you do a top stitch, it's probably best to look at the side you're going to be seeing rather than stitching on the inside. I'm going to stitch on the outside, and I'm just going to find a mark where it's close to the edge of my fold, and I can feel that with my finger just where I want the needle to lie. So when I find it close to the edge of that fabric, I can just feel the mark there, and I'm going to stitch all the way around. I start at a seam and do a little reverse stitch, and we can go right the way round in one. Right, so that's our little hem done. There's a gentle curve on that also, so just always make sure that this is lining up with a marking on the bed of your sewing machine, but we've got a nice even line of stitching for the hem there. So the last thing we've to do is our closure on the back. Now the instructions on there showed us how to do a tiny little rouleau loop to be inserted in that seam. Well, I didn't do that. I prefer to do a little thread one, and what I've got here is I think it's a fine crochet yarn. It's like an embroidery thread. It's quite substantial. I've knotted the end. I've got a double thickness, and I'm going to go in this little point here, and I'm going to come out right at the top. I'm going to bring my needle out right at the top, and we're going to make our own little loop. So there is a corner where the seams go round there. That's where I'm coming out, and I'm going to go in again through the seam line, just a centimetre down. It really depend on the button you're going to use. I haven't actually chosen a button yet, but it's going to be a small button. So a centimetre down, and I'm going back in through that seam line, and I'm going to come out at the top again. And there we have our little loop. So this will depend on how big your button is. So it's not to be huge. That looks about right to me from having done them before. And what I'm going to do is like a little blanket stitch around this thread. So I'll do that again. I've gone too quickly. I've got the loop, I've got the thread in this hand. I take the needle through the loop and out over that side. And we're going to do that again. So they've to be placed, the stitches want to land beside each other but not knotting over each other. So if you just keep a hold of that, the original loop. So we'll keep working our way around the loop, just gently pulling it, and I hope you can see that. Can you come in close for that? So we're just letting the stitches lie beside each other, not pulling too tightly. I think I've got room for one more. We're going to put that in there. There we are. So there's our little loop for it. Do you think I could get another one in there? I think I will. One more. And then we'll go back into this seam line. So we're within here again. and we've come out right at the stitch line. I'm going to pull that, but not too tight because we don't want it to distort the stitches that we've just made. And then we're going to do a little knot. I tend to do them the way you would do a French knot. So if I lie that down, I form my knot, and then I put the needle through that knot and point it exactly where the threads come out. And then I can pull the tail of thread from the needle end, and that guides the knot to exactly the place you want. And it will lie very close to the surface. And I can do that again, pulling it through, and if I hold my needle, point it and poke it right in, and see how the knot wants to form wherever it wants to form. If you just keep pulling that, it'll take it right down into the fabric again. So that's the knot made, and we're absolutely fine to cut the threads. So when we turn it out again, we've got our little loop ready for the button. So I'm going to sew my button on to this top corner on the other side. I'm sure everyone knows how to sew a button on. I've secured my thread with 2 or 3 stitches, and I've threaded my button on. It's on a shank at the back rather than having holes in the top, and we're just going to go, as we pull that quite firmly, and then we can go through the shank and then through to the back again. You kind of want to hit the same marks each time or it becomes really messy. Up to the front again, and then through the shank, and we're going to repeat that several times till we're secure, maybe 5 or 6 times. There we go, at last we've got our top finished. It's been a mega project doing it in so many small stages. I would normally have one of these made within 3 or 4 hours. It really doesn't take a long time, but because we've made it into bite-sized projects, it's been lurking in my room for a very long time. But we've got it finished now, and we can see all the lovely details that we've got. We've got our lovely smooth neckline with our neatly edged facing. We've got our beautifully smoothly set in sleeves. It's worth taking your time with that. That was a bit of a project in itself. Sleeves can be a bit daunting for beginners, but if you take your time you'll get there. And we've got our nice hem. I don't know if you can see that so well, our nice hemline. We've got our little button and loop, and it's all looking lovely. It doesn't quite fit this dummy, but she's I know that it fits me, so that's what we were after. Now this is just as good as a professionally, if not better, produced garment, because we've cut it perfectly straight. Remember, we had the lines all marked up so that our edges were parallel with the side of the fabric, and we made it all beautifully straight. The only way you could improve on this really now is if you had an overlocking machine. I was assuming you wouldn't have one as a beginner, and that would finish off these edges more neatly. But because it's a stable cotton, we're not going to worry too much about that. But that's why it's worthwhile using a nice cotton to start with. And I'm quite happy with that. I hope you've managed to make one. Next time I'll try and do a few variations to show you how you can upgrade your top and make it a bit more fancy. Change the style up slightly. We'll do that next time.